Hello everyone, my name is TrueDawn and welcome to another one of my Gwent videos. Today we're going to be talking about the new patch on the PTR that will soon be coming to live. I wanted to go over what I think of the changes, what they imply for the future of Gwent, what they imply about CDPR's design process, all of that stuff. I won't really so much be going over the whole will this be good conversation. There's going to be a lot of people on this Topdeck channel going over that in the coming days. So I will leave that to them. I want to focus more so on the design direction the game is heading in, because right now the main problem with Gwent is that the cards do not foster compelling interactions, and I want to see if we're making any forward progress on that. So, off the top, we can start with Filavandrel and Scoia'tael. Scoia'tael was obviously one of the biggest offenders last patch. Dwarves, Ithilien Tremors, Pauli, a lot of egregious cards in that faction. So the first one we'll go over, going from 3 to 4 in Filavandrel. This is one of a few changes we'll see moving forward of cards moving by 1 point in an apparent effort to make underplayed cards played more, not really address the reasons why those cards are underplayed or if it's okay that they're underplayed. Filavandrel isn't played because he's an inherently variant leader. A leader is a card that you really need stability from. You need to know what that effect is. You put it in your deck to synergize with cards or cover up vulnerabilities or accentuate strengths, all of that stuff, but it does a thing consistently every time. You're not going to get a different effect. Filavandrel, it could be anything. That's the reason people don't play it, not because the point value is too low. Sure, you could keep adding numbers to this card, and eventually it'll be strong enough on a raw power level basis, but that's not how you should really be designing things. So this and some other changes we'll go over when we get to it, not inspire a great deal of confidence about how they evaluate cards and that are warranting change, but there are some positives in some cards like Yorvith. Yorvith, for example, is going from 7 to 6 on the front end, but damage on the back end is going from 8 to 6. So net 1 point buff, but also focusing the strength of this card on the damage side shows that they understand that reactivity needs to get better, and also just makes the reactive cards able to hit a wider swath of things. So now Yorvith is actually able to kill a lot more, and that matters when you're trying to disrupt synergies, which is what the removal should be for, instead of just taking away points on their side as opposed to adding them to yours. This is a good change. This is moving in the right direction. This is the kind of stuff I like to see. Yorvith, probably better on the balance. Well, definitely better because he's 1 point more. But you will now be more incentivized to actually run this card for removal and then have the buff to all your elves be an ancillary benefit, rather than just like killing a 2 or a 4 or whatever just to get the trigger. You could still do that, but there is now a much larger opportunity cost. You get paid off higher for using this card for its intended purpose, and I like that. Next on the line is a Glace. The Glace is going from 9 to 8 and now banishes the card it resurrects from your opponent's graveyard. This is just a little bit of a strength nerf. I'm not sure how much banishing the card is going to come up. I don't know how often you cast things from your opponent's graveyard multiple times. Like how often you recur to Glace. Like, of course, there's Restore or Renew. Mix those two up every time. But I'm not sure that was so common where you need to do this. This is like mainly a housekeeping change, I guess, which is fine. A Glace is going down in power a bit. I do think the ceiling on this card in a lot of situations is too high, so bringing that down is good. I would have liked to see a return to the effort tag on this, where it's just like a 10 or something, and if you actually flash back a spell, it goes down to a 5. It's because the times this card is problematic is when it's getting a silver plus 8, and then it's just like way above rate. So that scenario still exists, not great, but this card isn't so egregious that it's going to be a huge problem moving forward. Yorvith Meditation got changed to now only be able to fight 2 units on the same row to duel each other. This is actually a really good change as far as gameplay is concerned, because now your opponent can interact with Yorvith Meditation. Previously, you would just like play out the round. Your opponent would probably have 2 things that are like at the 60% ratio difference for an optimal duel or something close to it. And then you would just use Yorvith Meditation in the end. Didn't matter where your opponent placed these things. It didn't really matter what they did. Just like save this to the end, played it, it got its point value, whatever. Now your opponent can understand what the good duel ratios are and play things on different rows in accordance with that and kind of play around this to some degree. And you, as the Scoia'tael player, can like play movement cards in your deck to line things up. There's a lot of interplay going on with this card now, as opposed to just wait until the end and do your meditation and see how much it is. So this card plays a lot better. Whether or not it will like see play, whether or not it's good enough to include, it's a conversation for other people. I'm more concerned about the gameplay pattern this card fosters, and this one is much more healthy than it previous. Morin going from 8 to 9. Where is Morin? There she is. And she also does 7 damage. I believe it was 5 before this. I think it was lower than 7. In any case, this is another thing like Yorvith focusing a lot of the strength of the card on the damage part, being able to kill more things, making the damage matter. That's really important. Morin in particular is just very easy to play around, though. You just play a small thing and negate the damage. So this card is... All ambush cards are in a weird spot because there's so few, and you really need like a certain density of ambush cards for them to be played. I would like to see it, especially like at least one more ambush bronze. So when they get an ambush card off of Elven Scout, I don't know with 100% certainty that it's Sapper. Like that shouldn't be a thing. So ambush cards in general need more support for the whole archetype to work. But I do like making reactive cards that kill things stronger. You need to be able to encourage people to break up synergies. There's actually some level of interplay going on in the game. Yarpen Zigrin going from 7 to 8. This is weird. I'm not sure why we need to buff this card. It does add more carryover to Scoia'tael, but the problem was Scoia'tael and Skellige were like the only 2 factions with reasonable carryover. Monsters could play Barbagazi, of course, but that's like a pretty bad card by itself. War Dancer and Morkvarg and Olgierd were just like so much better than everything else. I've wanted to see more carryover across all the factions, see it normalized, see it so everyone has the same access to carryover across all factions. That ended up not happening, and buffing carryover for one of the factions that already has carryover in War Dancer is weird. I'm not sure what's up with that. So, don't love this. Doesn't seem to make a great deal of sense, but maybe I'm missing something. And then the next two, Dwarven Agitator and Elven Scout. These fall under like the same umbrella. There were a bunch of cards, Agitator, Elven Scout, and Slave Infantry, and I think I'm forgetting one more, that were essentially just the Discover cards. You got to make a bronze with them, and then you got like 2 points on the house for no reason. All of these cards were just inherently above rate because you were just getting a reasonable bronze that has its normal strength plus 2 points on the house. So they started rolling those back. The Slave Driver also got a nerf down to 1. So that's a good change, moving these in the correct direction. Granted, I still think Agitator is too good. It shouldn't have a body because you still pump it with Dennis, and you're still just getting all these free points for what reason? And also additional consistency because you can see your good cards more often because Dwarven Skirmisher is still good because its numbers didn't change, just the functionality. So, as we'll get to in a minute. But yeah, these are moving in the right direction, but they're still problematic because they're just free points on the house for cards you would be playing otherwise. So, don't love that. Mahakam Guard. There he is. They kind of inverted this card. It's going from 9 to 4 on the body and 7 to 3 on the boost. So all of this card's power is now centralized on the boost. I do like this a bit more, making it so cards that do things like boost or damage or whatever, the power is centralized on that action. So it actually does what you want it to do. I'm not sure how much like this will matter. Hold on, is it 9 to 3? Yeah, it's like still same power level, but making it so the cards exemplify their functionality is good. That's like positive. That shows me that they get it to some degree. I like seeing stuff like that. So Mahakam Guard should be better at buffing stuff now. It depends on where you want to put that, but it does its job better. Half Elfin Hunter, just housekeeping thing. The copies are now doomed. It's like not a balance change. Dwarven Skirmisher now boosts by 3 instead of strengthening. This is obviously a very big deal. Where is Dwarven? There he is. So, Dwarven Skirmisher now boosts by 3 instead of strengthening. This obviously affects the ability to res it and kind of compound the value you get across rounds. Although this card is still just very strong. It's still just an inherent 12 that gets to 13 with Dennis. I've played a bit on PTR, and the Dwarves deck still exists. It still plays largely the same way. It's just that this card isn't as good, but it's still good enough. So this was obviously necessary, like boosting instead of strengthening. It didn't make sense to strengthen. I'm not sure if they nerfed the Dwarves deck enough to actually get it out of the format. And granted, whenever a deck is problematic, you don't necessarily want to delete it from the game. You just want to eliminate the elements that are problematic. And the elements of Dwarves that were problematic were Poly Dahlberg and Ithlin Tremors. They hit one of those two things. The Poly still exists, and even though this impacts the effectiveness of Poly by not giving these strengthen, Poly's still a problem. Poly's still really, really, really good. And just the gameplay pattern of this deck of not really interacting, playing your dwarves, just doing whatever, and then you have more points at the end, maybe not. That's not a gameplay pattern you really want to be encouraging. So while normally you don't really want to eliminate a deck from playability when you nerf it, Dwarves is probably one of the exceptions where you just don't want that in the game. So on the balance, Scoia'tael, I don't think they really did what they needed to do. A lot of the problematic elements still exist in the game. Ithlin, they didn't change her, they changed Tremors, which we can get to later. And Ithlin's still going to be a problem forever. Whenever they make a spell that scales exponentially, or just scales at all, it's going to be a problem with Ithlin. Even Tremors is Tremors still just Tremors in its current state without making golems, still very good with Ithlin. It's still just going to be over 20 points a high percentage of the time. So it's just not completely bonkers. So I would have changed Ithlin because it's going to be a problem forever. They're going to run into this later, and they're going to have to nerf it anyway. So why not do it now? But they do have a habit of waiting until the latest possible point and getting max punished before they change very obviously problematic things. We'll see how that pans out. And Dwarven Mercenary also got a point buff. Sure, whatever. Skellige. Moving over to Skellige. East got a buff. East, now going from 4 to 5, just a little tuning stuff. This card is now a lot better because of stuff we'll get to in a second. Heim going down from 4 to 3, probably fine. Heim is really good. Tuning it down a bit is okay, I guess, if you want to cut into the card's power level. Restore. This is a change I do not like at all. Restore now adds the Doom tag to the resurrected unit. This is an example of understanding that people are complaining about Restore. Oh, Restore is way too many points. You have to do something about Restore. You have to then discern whether the power level or the play pattern is the problem. And with Restore, I would have argued that the power level is the problem, and if you made it set the unit to 6 or 5, it would be fine. You would still be able to recur things like Gremist or any special effects, which was the point of that card. That was the reason, that's the functionality. To maintain that, and it wouldn't be oppressive. It wouldn't be a million points, but you would still strengthen things. You would have some value in later rounds, which is the whole point of strengthen. That's why that mechanic exists. Instead, it now strengthens and then gives it doom, defeating the purpose of strengthen. This card is now a just complete abomination to game design. It just doesn't make sense. If you're going to do this, if you wanted to make it so the renewed unit did not get a bonus in later rounds, just boost it. Just make it so it boosts. There's a word in the game for that. Instead, it's strengthen and give it doomed. So now, for example, if you wanted to use it as another way to res Queensguard, you would get your Queensguard, put into play, would res the other Queensguard, and then that Queensguard is doomed forever at the end of the round. It just goes away. Instead of just if you're not okay with it getting strength that you then use in later rounds, sure, that's fine. I'm amenable to that argument. Just make it boost. Instead of making it just de-synergize with the rest of the faction and its own functionality. So even though I've been on the other side of the unpopular opinion of Restore is largely fine, you can tone down the power, but the functionality is good. This is just such a wild way to change this card because it doesn't even make it that much worse. I mean, it caps the ceiling, but in a large percentage of scenarios, you still get a Beastmaster for 18. It's a lot, and that's really good. But it just now that Beastmaster is doomed, and like you can't res it in the future rounds. Not for like increased value, for no value. It's gone forever. And that's just nonsense. It's complete nonsense. Skellige is about resing, and just dooming things for no reason when you could have just made this card boost is preposterous. So I understand that boosting with the like set 2 thing is hard. But again, why I just would have made the set 2 number lower. Instead of, like, you could have made it like boost the difference to till it's 8. The wording would have been awkward, but preserving the functionality of the card to make sense is more important. So obviously don't love that. So Champion of Hove used to be Champion of Cunning. Or Champion of... wrong game. Champion of Champions. So now it can duel anything. That's really good. This card is now pretty decent removal. It does actually function pretty well with Restore because you can't res it through anything else. So the fact that it gets doomed doesn't matter. And buffing a dual unit, obviously very strong, even if it's only by 1. So this card, you'll see like a non-zero amount of play. It depends upon how many things it can duel profitably. This interacts well with like 10s and 11s. So if there's anything you care to kill that's like a 10 or 11, this card becomes good. It just depends upon how many of those are in the format. But yeah, I like that this card actually functions as removal now instead of whatever the heck it was before. Tursech Veteran. This is the biggest change in Skellige. Tursech Veteran now has the Soldier tag. This has a lot of implications. He is now a target you can pull from East. He is now resable with Priestess of Freya, and he is now a target for Clan Haymaid Battle Maiden. That makes the Veteran deck a thing again, and I've played with it a bit. It's not really fun because you're just vomiting points like most things, but it is an archetype. It is actually very strong. So this card actually functions now. A theme, making cards do what they're supposed to do. So we'll definitely be seeing a fair amount of Tursech Veteran going forward into the patch. This card is going to be very strong. It scales very well. It now has synergy with a large percentage of Skellige. And the cool thing is you can also build it in different ways. You can hybridize this with Axemen because Axemen are Tursech, or you could just kind of play good stuff with like Bears and Brockvar Hunters. So there's a bunch of ways you can go with the Tursech Veteran. One will probably like objectively be correct, but at least for now, it's interesting to explore all of the avenues this opens up and seeing how those play out. Moving on to Clan Greatsword is now an 8. This falls in line with understanding why a card isn't played that much. Clan on Greatsword is not good compared to the other options in Skellige, not because it's a 7, but because it fights asymmetric warfare. This card is designed, and like the deck you put it in is designed the way every deck should be, but every deck is not designed that way. The Greatsword deck has to play A in Greatsword, and then play B in Light Longship, and then create synergy for a payoff that can be disrupted through various means. You can move stuff, you can kill either thing, whatever. That's not how what decks function, even though they should. So this deck is just vulnerable to the world, while the other decks are not. And even though the payoff may be good, it's just not worth it because you're exposing yourself to things you just don't need to do. So again, yeah, sure, this is an 8 now. Doesn't change the problem I just talked about. You're still fighting asymmetric warfare with Clan on Greatsword. It doesn't really change anything. It likely will not see play still. I mean, you could still play it. It's like suboptimal, but fine. If people don't punish you, if they can't interact with this, it's very strong. It's just that you are able to interact with it with a million different things. So it's unlikely your opponent won't have something. So for Skellige, main takeaway, veterans are now going to be an archetype, which is cool. You essentially added a new archetype by changing a card function how it should be. That's awesome, especially because that archetype has a myriad ways you can build it. I like that. Changing Greatsword doesn't really do anything. You could have added another archetype if you made this more resilient, or changed the rest of the game to function in a similar way. Stuff like that. But at least we got one archetype out of it. There are some good things, some bad things in Skellige. Restore is pretty egregious, but we'll see how it goes in the future. Monsters. Unseen Elder, just going from 4 to 5. Again, looked at the numbers, saw this card wasn't being played enough, pumped it. Same with Whispering Hillock below it. Don't really love designing cards like that. I mean, you could, tuning stuff is fine, but the Whispering Hillock one is just again, Card's not being played, not because of the numbers, it's being played, not played because of functionality. You could say the same about Unseen Elder, that the reactivity just isn't good, because there's essentially just kill your thing plus whatever its strength is largely how this card functions. So we'll have to see if that, like, this is a metagame card. It's a fundamentally reactive card. That's why its play rate may have been low. It just depends if that reactivity is good or not. Kayran, going from, this is another change similar to Yorvith, focusing the power of the card on the interactive end. 7 is still not a great number. A lot of the things this killed pre-patch were 6 and went to 8. There are some things that are at 7. This does now kill a lot more things. It is probably in the realm of playability now. So I do like it. It's a step in the right direction. You could debate whether or not it should have been 7 or 8. But in general, this is good movement towards making cards that are supposed to do the things they're supposed to do. Carryover. Oh, they gave him his full name. I didn't notice that. Just another 1 point increase. A little bit better. That's fine. Monster's Nest. Monster's Nest no longer boosts, which I understand that this card was ubiquitous within monsters, but again, like, that's not necessarily bad. It's okay for cards within a faction to be central to that faction's identity and its gameplay. Similar with Restore and Skellige. Like, it's fine if the faction is relying on that card. It's fine if Monster's Nest has utility in every monster's deck. That's not inherently problematic. It can be, but it's not inherently so. And Monster's Nest certainly wasn't. It, like, actually was one of the few modal cards where the options were a real thing. A lot of the times people would build towards Ghoul, but you can still, like, get Drowner in spots. And, like, get Arrakis Behemoth if you wanted more inevitability in a consume deck, stuff like that. Like, this card had a bunch of gameplay to it. Lowering its power level for reasons seems weird to me. Because now this is just a bronze unit. Like, you get to choose, and you're paying a silver slot for the, like, variety for the choice, and that is worth something, but you're still just essentially playing a silver for a bronze card instead of, like, the pump, which may or may not be good enough, and I just don't like what it encourages. That, hey, if this card gets played a lot, we're going to nerf it. Just not for any reason, just because it's played a lot. So, not the best. Nithral got reworked. This is cool. It pays you off for having a high density of Wild Hunt units, as it should. It now deals 1 damage for every Wild Hunt unit in your hand. So you do want to play this early. It does get bad late. That's not great. Maybe you could have made this function like Viper School Witchers, where it checked units in deck. Obviously, it couldn't be like a 1-to-1 ratio, because then you deal like 20 or whatever. But something similar to that would have been better. I don't love that this card just gets worse as the game goes on. But I do like that it encourages you to have a high density of Wild Hunt units. That you have these synergies, and there's a payoff associated with that. That's good. Could have done it in a few different ways, but they're on the right path. I'm not going to get nitpicky about it. Morvud going from 5 to 6. Sure. Ifrit going from 7 to 8. Sure. Slizzard going from 3 to 2. Slizzard is in the same vein as Elven Scout and Agitator we talked about. Cards that are just free points on the house. You don't want to have those be too good. So ticking all of those down, totally fine. So Monsters doesn't really change a lot outside of Monster's Nest. That's really like the big one. And it's weird because Monsters was like had a lot of trouble. I don't know why it didn't get any buff to anything. The only deck we have right now is Consume for it. And there should be like some interactive archetypes. Like, even though they added 1 to Carryover and some other cards, that's again not really changing the functionality of decks, the reasons why they weren't good. Like, adding a net like 4 points to the deck isn't going to make it playable now. That's not how that works. So would have liked to see a little bit more of an evaluation on what they should be doing in Monsters, what you want to change, like what decks you encourage, make like an interactive deck a thing instead of just Consume, all of that stuff. But I guess we'll have to wait until next patch for that. Nilfgaard. Nilfgaard is probably the most questionable of the sections, as you will see it is very short. Treason now forces 2 adjacent units to duel each other. This is weird for Nilfgaard because there is no movement in Nilfgaard, like you can't control where your opponent's units are. Yorvith Meditation and Scoia'tael is cool because there are movement sub-themes in that faction, and Yorvith accentuates that, so there's synergy there, and it's like a cool way to do that. Treason seems weird because you're not really... You're putting stuff on your opponent's board with spies, and I guess that's what they're supposed to synergy with. But the only things you're making over there that are big enough are like Cantarella, Fake Siri, but you don't want to damage Fake Siri. That doesn't really... Yeah, that's not good. Joachim to some extent. So this seems like a weird card to put in Nilfgaard. I don't know whether or not it's good. Just like design-wise, it doesn't seem like there's things that support this outside of Cantarella. Not sure. Also, Nilfgaard Silver is highly competitive. Talked about Slave Driver already. Slave Driver going down to 1, just want to limit points on the house. Just it's how things become problematic. Also, the copies you make are now doomed. That's actually a much bigger deal. It was weird to like... I played like a bunch of Skellige, and they would Slave Driver my stuff in round 1, and then Slave Driver again and res it with Priestess of Freya, and it was really weird. It didn't feel right, so that's a good change like that. And Rot Tosser just going from 7 to 8, sure, whatever. Biggest omission here, this guy. Imperial Enforcers, unchanged. The Nilfgaard Spies deck is going to be a massive, massive problem if these patch notes do not change from now to live. The only thing holding that deck in check was the fact that Scoia'tael was just like wildly overpowered on a numbers basis. Nilfgaard is just really, really, really strong in its functionality because it doesn't have a weakness. It is incredibly consistent because of how many emissaries you can play. It has long round, it has burst, it has removal now in Imperial Enforcers. Before, the way Imperial Enforcers functioned when it only did 2 damage when something appeared, the only way you could ever remove something of that was with the emissary chain, which was also problematic. But it wasn't really hard removal. It was just a source of inevitability, like way to offset your disloyal units. There was also a time to interact with it. You could kill it before they played all the spies and got more value, etc. Now it's just you can play this whenever, and there's no way to interact with its point total. It also acts as hard removal, disrupting synergies. So this card is wildly out of line, like not close to being close. And it not getting touched is a huge red flag to me. That's like, this is going to be a problem. It's very, very possible, even though I don't want it to be the case, that we essentially just have the patch we just had, but replace Dwarves with Nilfgaard. And Nilfgaard's actually more oppressive than Dwarves when it's the best deck. So, not looking forward to the metagame if this card is still in its current state. But to be fair, it requires a bit of a nuanced change because I don't think you can make Imperial Enforcer function the way it did before because of how they've changed the way the game is coded. So I have some level of sympathy, but you still like need to do something about this. Like this card is still very, very, very far out of line, and it's enabling a deck that is going to be oppressive if nothing else changes. So hopefully we still have about a week or so-ish until the patch. So it seems like. And hopefully something changes by then. Northern Realms. Northern Realms is one of the factions that historically suffers from an identity crisis. We really don't know what this faction should be, so I would like to see some forward progress on that. But you'll see this split up a little bit. We just got numbers. No card text changed, just numbers. We got Shani -1, Selkirk +1, Vincent +1, Reaver Hunter +1, Medic +2. Yeah, you added like 5 points to the faction on the whole. Is like what do you think that's gonna do? Like, serious question. When you add like 5, well, it has more than that because it kind of double stacks on Selkirk. But when you add like 6 or 7 points to an entire faction, like you buff the faction by 6 points, what do you think that's gonna do? You think that's gonna like make us, oh, now Cursed is gonna be good, or now like it won't be less fun, or I don't know, man. So I would have liked to see some forward progress made on fostering some identity for Northern Realms, doing something to make the Cursed archetype playable, furthering that, giving it more synergies, like something, anything. And we got numbers, a whole bunch of numbers. Not even a whole bunch, like a couple. Got a couple. All right, so neutral cards. Siri Nova. This is probably the biggest change among the neutral cards. Siri Nova is now 22 instead of 25. This is not actually a nerf, because Siri's biggest foil was Geralt Igni, and Geralt Igni no longer hits Siri. Even if you Royal Decree Siri out, it's still underneath Geralt Igni. You can just play on a row by itself because everything's agile and it doesn't matter. Your opponent can interact with it. There's still obviously Scorch, but again, it has lower strength, so the Scorch is worse. I'm not sure what the genesis for this change is, because again, this screams to me, they looked at the numbers, everyone's playing Siri Nova, we should nerf Siri Nova, instead of asking, is that okay? Is it okay that Siri Nova is a high play rate? We made this card to foster an archetype. We wanted people to build around this card. They're building around this card. Is that bad? I would have contested no. It was fine. Like, it's okay if a card is played. It's okay if a card is played a lot, especially when it goes in different decks. Like, this is a neutral card. It is functions differently in Scoia'tael than in Skellige than in Northern Realms. Like, there's a bunch of ways you could play with this card. It encouraged a bunch of cool archetypes. Nerfing it because it's played too much seems really preposterous to me. And also the fact that when you nerf it, it's not actually a nerf. So this is a very questionable change. I don't agree with it on various levels. Especially because I talked about in a video I put out a couple days ago about how there are very few cards in Gwent that when you play require you to assume a risk. Like, you just play it and it happens and whatever. Siri Nova was one of the few cards that actually required you to assume a risk because of how vulnerable it is to Igni. And now it's no longer vulnerable to Igni. So you removed like the risk component, which was like one of the more compelling things about this. You tried to nerf a card that was played a lot, but it's okay that it was played a lot because we wanted people to be building those decks. That's why you made the card. And C, the nerf isn't actually a nerf. So on a bunch of levels, that's not a great change. Not really here for it. We'll probably still be seeing Siri Nova decks, but it's weird. Like, this whole sequence is weird. Like every decision on that chain that led to this incarnation of Siri Nova, weird. Avlok the Sage getting a buff from 1/2. This is like the same thing as the Phil Evangel change, where they saw that this card is underplayed. Yeah, let's give it a point. Maybe it'll be played more. Sure, whatever. Again, not underplayed because it's low power, underplayed because of the card's base functionality of being inherently. Yennefer Conjurer. Just a little bit of a buff. This actually matters more on this card than other cards, because this is a card that establishes inevitability. So when it, like, the bigger impact it has when it goes into play, the more opportunities you'll have to play it to establish the inevitability earlier. Also very relevant now out of Thunder range. That's a big deal. So this card is actually much, much better, even though this is only, like, this is a 1 point that matters. This 1 point does things. So this one's a big deal. Yennefer Conjurer now much better. Probably a playable card. Commander's Horn. This is one that I actually don't like to see nerfed, even though you can make the argument that Commander's Horn is too strong. Commander's Horn was one of the few cards in the game that actually encouraged synergy. What I mean by that is, in order to enable Commander's Horn, you have to complete a mini quest. You have to put 5 units on the same row, have them survive on top Commander's Horn. Like, Commander's Horn is your payoff for completing this mini quest. Granted, like, you could debate how hard that quest is to complete, but still, you are putting things on the board in a specific way to then get a payoff. That is a gameplay pattern you want to encourage. That is not a gameplay pattern you want to discourage. So them nerfing this card and thus discouraging that type of gameplay is not really something I'm into. If you want to, like, make this card like only 4 units for less or something like that, that's fine. It's still, like, it still exists. It still has that payoff. It still does the same, has the same pattern. They didn't really change how the card functions. But again, just discouraging the type of stuff that you should be encouraging, I don't love that. I would like to see more cards like Commander's Horn that require you to get things on the board in a specific way or get specific things on the board, and then you get a payoff. I like those cards, because those cards then encourage board interaction, which encourages interplay, which makes for fun. So I don't love that, but on a power level basis, I'm okay-ish with it. Fine. Commander Sword, or not Commander Sword. We just did that one. Summoning Circle. There it is. Summoning Circle can't make spies anymore. This is something we told them to do like 4 months ago or whatever, and they finally did it. I would have loved to be playing the game for the past 4 months without this card making spies, but alas, was not the case. So, awesome. Good change. Really, 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 really late, but better late than never, I guess. Lesser Demons. Lesser Demons now banishes instead of discarding. This is interesting because this card actually had the potential for synergy in a discard deck, which is like where it would be playable. I understand that like you don't want the ceiling on this card to be too high because tutors are very powerful in a game like Gwent where you draw so few cards. But now this card is never going to be played unless you want to just plug game. Like, you can't mitigate the risk in any way. And I thought it was cool that you could mitigate the risk on this card through deck building. Taking that away is just, like, kind of makes the card a lot less interesting and a lot less playable. So, don't love that. Stableford's Tremors. This was the answer to the Ithilien Tremors problem. They decided to hit Tremors and now no longer spawns elementals if it kills anything. It's still kind of good. I like the incarnation of this card where it damaged both sides. So it was like good in wounding Skellige and encouraged punished Swarm. There's like kind of interplay with it. But this card is probably not playable by itself, but still playable with Ithilien. So we still have Ithilien Tremors. It's just not even much worse. Just like 6 to 12 points worse. Which when it was worth 40 frequently is like not fixing the problem. So get ready to still get Ithilien Tremors. Still gonna happen. That's not going away. So look forward to that. And then Doppler lost its organic tag. Little housekeeping thing or whatever. It would make it so you can't get it with Herbalist. Again, disencouraging interactions that give you points in the house for cards you would play anyway. Makes sense. So, in conclusion, we saw a lot of 1-point changes, trying to make cards that may or may not be playable more played. Stuff I don't entirely agree with. The Restore change, I think, is pretty egregious. The Siri Nova change is very questionable. A lot of the things I wanted to see from this patch, I did not end up seeing. I didn't see any encouragement of like mini-quest gameplay, like incentivizing people to play specific things on the board, which encourages people to try and stop them from doing so to get the payoff. Like, you need to make cards that encourage some level of interplay on the board, which there currently aren't. And until we have something like that, Gwent's just going to be boring. And we didn't really make a whole bunch of forward progress on that front in this patch. Granted, that's hard stuff to do. That requires, like, kind of wholesale change to how the game currently functions, or at least how their card design has worked up until now. So, if it's going to take a bit of time, I get that. But, how much time you got? How long are we going to just hang out waiting for the game to change? That's a question you have to ask yourself. So, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I will be doing more of these on my own channel and on the Topdeck channel. So, look forward to those, and I will see you guys next time. Have a good day.